I knew I should have stepped back when his hand rested on my shoulder, but I didn't. I let it stay. And then he whispered, barely above a breath, "Are you tired, Mom?" A simple question, one I'd heard 1,000 times. But that night, it broke something inside me, not out of exhaustion, but out of everything I'd been holding in for years. You won't believe what happened next, because sometimes the smallest gestures carry the heaviest weight. And once a line starts to blur, it rarely ever returns to where it was. If you've ever felt something you couldn't name, something you weren't supposed to feel, leave behind one secret in the comments. Even if it's just a word, or a pause, or a moment you've never dared to share until now. Now let me tell you what really happened that night. I lost David 3 years ago. 3 years, and still there are mornings I reach for his side of the bed before I remember it's been empty for far too long. He didn't just leave a house behind. He left silence in the hallways. He left unread books on the nightstand. He left me. And if you've ever been a wife who becomes a widow overnight, you know, it's not just grief, it's confusion. It's the quiet that screams, the way your own breathing feels too loud when you're alone in the kitchen. Lucas was just 17 when it happened. My baby. Still figuring out who he was. Still too young to carry the weight of my heartbreak. But he did, somehow. In between college applications and learning to shave, Lucas stepped into the space his father left behind. Not to replace him. No. But to hold me up in the moments I thought I'd collapse. He started small, making sure I ate, fixing the leaky faucet David never got around to. But then there were the things that broke me, the way he'd check if I locked the doors before bed. The soft knock on my bedroom door with a cup of tea when the weather turned cold. The quiet way he'd say, "I've got you, Mom," and mean it like a vow. And maybe that's where the line began. Not crossed, not even touched, just softened. I never questioned his kindness, but somewhere deep inside, I started to feel something I didn't have the courage to name. Not yet. Lucas was never just a boy, not even when he was 1. There was always something gentle about him, not soft. No, Lucas had strength, but it was the quiet kind, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. He didn't fill a room with his voice like his father once did. He filled it with presence, steady, solid, certain. By the time he turned 20, he had grown into himself in a way that caught me off guard. Broad shoulders, hands that looked like they were made to fix things or hold you. A jawline David would have been proud of, but it wasn't just how he looked. It was the way he moved around me, thoughtfully, intentionally. And then there was the car. It was a Tuesday, cold, cloudy. The kind of day that makes everything feel a little heavier than it should. Lucas came in with his hands behind his back, a boyish grin pulling at the corners of his mouth. "Put on your shoes," he said. "I have something to show you." I raised an eyebrow. "You're being cryptic. You'll like this one. Promise." He led me out the front door, down the steps, and into the driveway, and there it was, a brand new SUV, sleek pearl gray, parked like it belonged there all along. My breath caught. "That's not mine," I said. Eyes wide, he handed me a set of keys. "It is now Lucas," I whispered. "Why? Because you've always done everything for everyone else. It's your turn to be taken care of, to drive something safe, reliable, beautiful, like you." I stared at him, not the car. Him, the way he stood there. Not like a kid trying to impress, but like a man who knew exactly what he was doing. I don't know what to say. Then don't, he smiled. Just drive. And I did. That night, we drove with the windows, cracked wind in our hair, laughter spilling out onto streets that suddenly didn't feel so empty. And from there, the gestures kept coming. He'd refill the windshield wiper fluid without me asking, warm up my car on frosty mornings, bring home my favorite brand of tea. Without a reminder, I'd find little handwritten notes stuck on the fridge. Don't forget to breathe today. Mom, dinner's on me tonight. And then there were the things David never did. Lucas noticed when my hands ached. He'd rub them gently, without saying a word. On days when my back flared up, he'd pull a chair close and massage my shoulders with slow, careful pressure that made me close my eyes and forget what year it was. He never asked if I needed help. He just gave it without hesitation, without boundaries. And maybe that's when the silence started to feel louder, not because something was wrong, but because something was changing. The way I looked at him, the way he looked back, it started with dinner. I'd had a long day, one of those days when your back aches before lunch and your mood sours before sunset. I came home to the scent of garlic and rosemary filling the kitchen. Lucas was barefoot in a soft t-shirt and sweat standing over the stove like he'd done it 100 times. He turned, smiled, and said, "You don't have to do anything tonight. Just sit." He poured me a glass of wine, pulled out my chair, and placed a plate in front of me, like it was second nature. Roast chicken, my favorite, perfectly crisp on the outside, tender inside. I didn't say much that night. I just watched him, the way he moved, calm in control, and the way he kept checking on me, not out of obligation, but out of something else, something quieter, more tender. Later, as I sat on the couch, feet aching, he knelt down in front of me. "Give me your legs," he said softly. I laughed. "What are you doing?" "Just trust me." He smiled, and then his hands wrapped around my ankles. Warm and sure. He began massaging my feet. Slow, steady circles that made me sigh without meaning to. His thumbs moved with gentle pressure, easing knots I hadn't even realized were there. I leaned back, eyes fluttering shut, heart doing something I didn't have words for. That night became 2. 2 became 4. Then it wasn't just dinners or massages. It was spa gift cards he bought, just because candles lit in the bathroom when I came home from a long walk. A blanket draped over my shoulders before I even said I was cold. And those little notes, "You deserve softness today. Let me take care of you for once." The world kept calling me mom. But sometimes, when he looked at me, it didn't feel like that was the whole story anymore. The storm came out of nowhere. One minute I was washing dishes, the next. The lights flickered twice, and then went out completely. Wind howled against the windows, and thunder cracked so loudly it rattled the kitchen glasses. "Lucas," I called, my voice sharp in the sudden darkness. "I'm here," he answered, from the living room flashlight beam, cutting through the shadows. He stepped into the kitchen, calm as ever, with that quiet confidence I'd come to rely on. "Looks like we're out for the night," he said, offering me one of the flashlights. I took it, fingers brushing his. "Remember when the power used to go out, when you were little?" I smiled. "You'd light candles and make us play hide and seek," he said. Grinning, I laughed. "You were so bad at hiding." He leaned in, eyes glinting. "Want to see if I've improved?" I raised an eyebrow. "Lucas, we're not kids anymore. Doesn't mean we can't pretend for one night." He challenged me with that look I could never resist. Before I knew it, I was counting in the hallway, heart pounding harder than it should have. I found him curled behind the armchair, grinning like the boy he once was. I pulled him up by the wrist, and for a moment we were nose to nose. Neither of us moved. "You're warm," he said softly. I opened my mouth to speak, but said nothing. Later we curled up on the couch, wrapped in a throw blanket, candles flickering around us. The storm still raged, but it felt far away. We picked a movie, an old love story I hadn't watched in years. About halfway through, he shifted closer. Our legs touched, then our arms. Then he slowly placed one arm around my shoulders. "Is this okay?" he whispered. I nodded too quickly. His warmth seeped through me, the kind that stays long after the contact ends. His hand grazed the side of my arm, just once. Just enough, I didn't say a word. But I didn't move away either. The movie ended, but neither of us moved. The credits rolled in soft white letters across the screen, and the only sound in the room was the rain, slow, steady, like a heartbeat against the window panes. Lucas leaned his head back against the couch, arms still wrapped around me. I should have pulled away by then. Maybe said something to break the moment, but I didn't. I stayed there, letting the silence stretch. Then I felt it. His hand, shifting slightly, fingertips brushing the edge of my hair. He tucked a strand behind my ear, slowly, carefully. His fingers lingered for just a second too long, tracing the curve where my jaw met my neck. I felt it like a pulse, quick hot. My breathing caught shallow in my chest. I turned slightly, and suddenly our faces were too close to be innocent. I could feel his breath, warm, clean, just a hint of mint from the tea earlier. It brushed against my cheek like a question he wasn't asking out loud. He didn't lean in. Neither did I. But the space between us felt fragile, like one breath could erase it. "I miss this," he whispered. "This," I asked, voice barely above a breath. "Being near you. Feeling you close." I looked away, but his hand found mine. He squeezed, then slowly let go, like he didn't want to, but had to. Later that night, I stretched my legs out along the couch, my feet resting in his lap. He glanced down, then back at me, one brow raised. "You trust me?" he asked. I didn't answer. I just nodded. His hands found my ankles, thumbs circling the bones with expert gentleness, then lower, along the sides of my foot, then back up toward the delicate bend of my ankle. His touch was warm, confident, almost reverent. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I forgot I was someone's mother. It was late. The storm had faded into soft drizzle, and the room glowed with nothing but the flicker of dying candles. Lucas and I sat close still, like neither of us wanted to move in case the silence cracked something open. He looked over at me, eyes searching not for answers, but permission. "I know this might sound strange." He began, his voice low, "but sometimes I think you're the only person who ever really saw me." I blinked, surprised. "Of course I see you, Lucas. You're my son." He gave a small, almost sad smile. "Yeah, I know, but it doesn't feel like that anymore." The words landed like thunder, not loud, but impossible to ignore. He didn't rush to explain. He just looked at me, steady, open, and I saw it, what he wasn't saying. The affection in his gaze no longer sat in the space reserved for family. It had moved, shifted, deepened. I should have said something, redirected, reminded him of who I was, but I didn't, because part of me didn't want to. I looked down, fingers twisting the edge of the blanket in my lap. "Lucas, what are you feeling right now?" He didn't hesitate. Safe, wanted, needed, all the things I don't usually let myself feel. He reached out slowly, brushing the back of his fingers along my cheekbone. The touch was light reverent, and my eyes fluttered closed for just a second too long. "I don't want to cross any lines," he whispered, "but I can't pretend they aren't already fading." I opened my eyes, and for a moment, I let myself look at him, not as a mother, but as a woman who had been lonely for too long. And that was the moment I knew. Whether or not we ever spoke it out loud, everything had already changed. After that night, something subtle shifted. Lucas didn't say anything. Neither did I. But the way we moved around each other changed. The pauses grew longer. The touches didn't end as quickly. We lingered. I started to expect him. Not just at dinner, but everywhere. In the hallway, when I turned the corner. In the kitchen, while I brewed tea. On the couch, already holding the throw blanket open, waiting for me to curl into it. He didn't ask anymore. He just opened the space, and I stepped into it, and then it became routine. He'd sit at the foot of my bed while I read. I'd lean into him when the nights were too quiet. We'd fall asleep on the couch, more than in our own rooms. One morning, I woke to find his sweater on my bedroom chair. I didn't know when he left it there, but I pulled it over my nightgown like second skin. I wore it all day. I found myself looking for his scent in it, holding it a little too long, breathing slower when it was close. There was nothing scandalous, nothing anyone could point to and say, "That's wrong." But everything about it was too much, too soft, too intimate. And yet it never felt forced, never felt planned. It just happened, like waves pulling back into the ocean, only to return again and again. I stopped thinking of our closeness as a coincidence because it wasn't. It was comfort. It was need. It was everything I didn't know I'd been missing until I found it in my own living room. In the arms of the only person who never left. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single moment I could point to and say, "That's when everything changed." It was slower than that. Softer, more dangerous, because of how natural it felt. A glance that lingered too long. A touch that stayed a second past comfort. A silence that felt heavy, with things we couldn't name. And somewhere between the blankets on the couch and the sweater draped over my shoulders, I stopped thinking like a mother. I started feeling like a woman again. And that terrified me. Because what kind of woman feels warmth bloom in her chest when her son says her name in a certain way? What kind of mother notices the way his voice deepens at night, or how his hands have grown too big to be called a boy's? I'd find myself staring at the space between us, not the physical distance, but the space that used to be filled with boundaries. It wasn't gone. Not yet. But it was fading, like chalk on wet pavement. One night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, toothbrush still in hand, and whispered to my reflection, "You have to stop this." But stop what? Nothing had happened. Not really. Except I started sleeping in his sweater more than my own pajamas. Except I waited for his footsteps in the hallway before I could fall asleep. Except I looked forward to his hand brushing mine in the dark, more than I ever looked forward to David's kisses. So I stood there shaking, ashamed. Not because of what had happened, but because of what I wanted to happen next. The rain returned that night. Not a storm, just a soft, steady patter, like the sky was whispering instead of crying. Lucas and I sat in the living room again, candles flickering low shadows dancing along the walls. He had picked a movie. I used to love the kind with slow romance and long silences, the kind that makes you feel something, even when no one says a word. I don't remember the plot. I just remember how close we were on the couch, how the blanket rested over both of our laps, how my head fit perfectly against his shoulder, and how his hand moved up and down my arm, slowly, absent-mindedly, like it had always belonged there. At some point, he turned toward me. "I like seeing you like this," he said, voice soft. Like what? Comfortable, safe, open. I didn't know what to say, so I smiled. Small, real tired. He reached up, tucked a piece of hair behind my ear again, and let his fingers linger. My eyes closed just for a moment, and then he kissed my cheek. Not fast, not playful, but slow, still intentional. And when I turned too slightly, maybe too willingly, his lips brushed the corner of my mouth. It wasn't a kiss. Not truly. But it wasn't not one either. We stayed like that for a heartbeat too long. Then we both looked away. No words, no explanations. Just two people sitting in candlelight, knowing exactly what had just almost happened. And realizing almost was already too far. We didn't talk about it. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not even weeks later, when the rain came again, and we sat on the same couch with the same blanket between us. But something had settled. Not tension, not shame. Just a quiet knowing that we had crossed into something else, something unnamed, unspoken, but undeniably there. Sometimes I wonder if it would have been easier to feel disgust or guilt. At least then I'd know what box to put it in. But all I felt was warmth, safety, and a terrifying kind of comfort that didn't come with labels. I didn't feel like I was losing myself. I felt found, in a way I hadn't felt since David died. They say love can be wrong, but what if it simply shows up in the wrong time, the wrong form, the wrong body, but still carries the right feeling? What then? So I keep the silence, not because I'm hiding, but because some truths aren't meant to be confessed. They're meant to be carried gently, quietly, forever. Have you ever loved someone in a way you couldn't explain? Leave behind a whisper in the comments, just one word, one memory, or one moment you've never dared to speak aloud until now. And if you believe some stories are too real to ignore, too deep to judge, subscribe. Because here, we don't just tell secrets, we honor them.